Okay, so I did say that the next few videos on the channel would be sort of going over stuff that has been talked about before, but that we have not actually had the opportunity to explore on this YouTube channel just yet. This is one of those videos, because today we are talking about the Toronto Maple Leafs and defenseman targets that they're going after. Names that have been tossed out there, names that we have had multiple conversations about before, but the reason we're talking about these once again is because we now have ourselves insight as to what the trade price could actually be. They've been revealed, folks, and a lot of this comes to us in the form of articles that were a few days old already, but it is good, I feel, to just cover all the bases, see what things are going on, and have it on the record, right? So that when we do see a trade, or if any of these players get traded to other teams, we can compare and contrast and say, okay, well, the projected Toronto price was this, and the other team traded for that, and we could, sort of have a good discussion about that. So, because the entire hockey world revolves around Toronto, sorry guys, you didn't get Shohei yesterday, now you have to settle for NHL trade rumors for right-handed defensemen. Today we are going over to the Calgary Flames and talking about Chris Tanev, as we have done so already in the past, and we are also going over to a few other names that have been linked around to Toronto in the past, as well as a guy that actually was a former Maple Leaf already, Ilya Lyubushkin. Now, before we dive into the entire Lyubushkin conversation, because he is the new guy in these conversations, maybe not entirely new, but definitely not in the same conversation flow as we've talked about with Chris Tanev already. But when it comes to Chris Tanev, I feel like most people can acknowledge that he has been the quote-unquote main guy that the Toronto Maple Leafs have been going after in terms of right-handed defenseman depth. He has been the easy choice. Like, the Leafs need shutdown D, shot blockers, guys who can move the puck up ice, and Tanev is pretty much that. Maybe less of the puck moving up the ice type of guy, more of the defensive shutdown guy, and he has been a pretty good player the past few years. He's also been linked to Toronto forever, pretty much. Ever since he was a Canuck, everybody was talking about the idea of him getting traded for Liljegren, stuff like that, but either way, Chris Tanev was indeed one of the main names, and we have made videos throughout the past few weeks here saying that, hey, Tanman is a guy, and there is an update to be had. All this stuff going on in regards to Nikita Zadorov being off the market and Chris Tanev still being there, etc., etc. But if you go over to TSN and a recent edition of Insider Trading from earlier this week, this was from December 7th, so a few days ago, there is indeed a conversation had by Darren Dreger asking the question as to whether or not the price is too high for the Toronto Maple Leafs trade targets. Now, the good thing about this article is that the entire transcript is available on the website, so we can just screenshot it, put it on the screen, what exactly it is that Darren Dreger says. I don't have to steal the clip because that's copyrighted footage from the TV. Let's go out there and read what Darren Dreger says in regards to Chris Tanev and what the trade price actually is. Of course, the easy link here is that Brad Treliving, Toronto Maple Leafs GM, used to be in Calgary, and he was the guy that was around. He had Tanev for a bit, right? So, what exactly is the scoop here? Let's use the term that Brad Treliving often uses, and that he's grinding away. He's working on it. He'd like to add a defenseman, preferably a right-shot guy, but the prices right now are too high. If you look at Chris Tanev of the Calgary Flames, the Flames want to keep their powder dry here. They want to see the momentum build, if you will, in terms of the ask. Would Toronto be willing to give up a second-round pick for Chris Tanev? Well, maybe, but Toronto doesn't have a second-round pick. They're limited in their draft supply. You look at Sean Walker of the Philadelphia Flyers, again, he's a really strong right-handed defenseman. The Flyers love him, but it's expected they could command as much as a first for him. And another familiar name to the Toronto Maple Leafs fans, Ilya Lyubushkin of the Anaheim Ducks. Anaheim doesn't want to trade him just yet, so everybody has to be patient. You then have an entire spiel done by Pierre LeBrun. He talks about even more names: Tyson Barrie, Ryan Johansson, Matt Duchene, Tony DeAngelo, Tanev, etc., etc. Essentially, the conclusion here is that Tanev, hey, the Flames are in no rush to trade him. The Flyers, no rush to trade Sean Walker, and heck, take a look at the NHL standings right now, and the Flyers are really darn good. They are second in the entire Metro Division. Is that a team that would be in a position to trade away some of their most valuable right-handed defensemen in this trade market? I mean, they're literally in the playoff picture right now, and they're winning games pretty convincingly, so I don't know. If there's a time for Philadelphia to come back down to earth, then okay, maybe they start to think about trading away guys. Maybe Sean Walker goes for a first-round pick. Maybe Toronto is a team to send that pick away. But they have no reason to make this trade now. Anaheim, same thing. They don't want to go out there and make a trade right away, even though the Ducks are pretty meh this season. I mean, they're not doing all too hot in the Pacific Division. Either way, though, when it comes to this trade price, for Tanman, honestly, I feel like it's pretty fair. Like, Darren Dreger tossing out the idea of a second-round pick for Tanev at this moment seems alright, especially considering that Nikita Zadorov just got sent away for a third and a fifth. But I will say there was a little bit of extra leverage in that Zadorov trade because the Vancouver Canucks didn't retain any salary. Should Tanev be traded to Toronto, there would need to be some salary retained. Maybe there's even the third team getting involved in there to retain an extra 25% or whatever, because, you know, that always happens nowadays, especially with these teams strapped up against the cap. But for Chris Tanev to be in that second-round pick territory, hey, makes sense. But if the Toronto Maple Leafs just don't have that second-round pick, then what are you going to do? You're crap out of luck here. You're going to have to force yourselves to give away a prospect or make some other cost-saving move to open up some more space and maybe allow yourselves to be able to take more of Tanev's salary to reduce the price. Who really knows? Or if you just want to go all balls to the wall, you trade away for a Philadelphia guy that has been on fire this year, you trade away a bigger price, or you try to wait for Anaheim and get Lyubushkin. There are a lot of options here for Toronto, especially now that the LTIR space has opened itself up considerably. With all these names getting added onto the IR, it makes things a little bit more flexible. But at the end of the day, if the Anaheim Ducks are not willing to make a trade yet, if the Flyers are not willing to make a trade yet, if Chris Tanev is not necessarily seeking to get moved right away either, then you're just going to have to be at the mercy of these teams. If Calgary's strategy is, okay, we'll wait till the deadline, and then we'll trade Tanev. Because if we hold this guy out in front of the hungry pack of sharks here, if we hold the bait out and say, okay, this guy's on the market, right-handed defenseman, shot blocker, defensive-minded guy, then teams will start to build interest, and over the weeks and over the months, they could build more interest, and maybe it gets to a point where these teams start to bid each other out, and there's a bidding war going on. Maybe that's the philosophy here. Of course, we recognize that sometimes it's better to make a trade when the iron is hot, when a team is willing to go out there and commit the assets right away, because sometimes if you hold on to your assets too long, they could decline in value. And we've been seeing a bunch of these conversations pop up over the years. You could say, like, oh, maybe Jack Eichel was traded for a little bit less than he could have gotten. Maybe you could say the same thing about Giroux, Patrick Kane, right? And then even now, you could say there's like an Andrei Kuzmenko conversation to be had. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later in today's show, because, you know, I'm a Canucks fan. I love talking about my Vancouver boys, especially the ones that aren't doing all too well. But either way, if you're a Toronto Maple Leafs fan, let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. How do you feel about the idea of Chris Tanev costing about a second-round pick, that in which you don't have? Sean Walker costing about a first, Ilya Lyubushkin being tossed around in there too. What are your thoughts on each of these names? They can all provide good value, and that's definitely not something I'm going to dispute. It's just, as to what value they provide, do you think these prices worked out? Do you think this is something you'd be willing to do, especially with the salary retained, the cap compliancy rules you'd need to follow, etc., etc., etc.? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below about these three guys. If you're a fan of either the Flyers, the Flames, or the Anaheim Ducks, what are your thoughts about Toronto making a trade for these guys? And if it is a trade for one of your players, what is it that you want back from the Maple Leafs? Is it that price that Darren Dreger went out there and talked about on TV? Is a second-round pick good for Tanev? Is a first good for Walker? Even if you're a Ducks fan, what do you think Lyubushkin could go for? Would you want to trade Lyubushkin away right away, since you guys aren't really doing all too well? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below about either of these three teams, either of these three players, and the Maple Leafs, of course, themselves. What are your thoughts about these trade prices? I hope you enjoyed this video, and bye.